Welcome to Parenting Special Needs Family Live Chat. Hi, I'm Shantae. Has anyone ever made an inaccurate assumption about your family's cultural background? Did you know how to address it? And what do we mean by cultural differences and assumptions? Well, can't assume that everybody celebrates Halloween or even birthdays because some cultures don't. And some cultures don't allow you to wear shoes in their house. And in some cultures, if food is offered or drink and you don't accept it, you could be considered offending the host, which is offensive. But tonight we're going to talk about it. We're going to focus on conversations on differences and assumptions, bias, and advocating for your child. I'd like to introduce you to our panel tonight of parent professionals. Our first one up is Zipporah Levy Shackelford. She's also going to be our moderator for tonight. She is the founder and the behavior and education consultant for Creative Approach Development Center in Richmond, Virginia. Claudia Axelrod is the clinical director for Positive Behavior Support Corporation and one of the founding members for the Multicultural Special Interest Group, SIG, for Florida Association for Behavioral Analysis. Moretta Copeland works for the Virginia Commonwealth University and is the cultural broker for the African American community at the Center for Family Involvement. Hadia Khan is program director for the Autism Society of Greater Cincinnati. Her role includes planning and developing programs, collaborating with community partners, and supporting families. She is the mother of a young man with autism and his greatest advocate. Rebecca Stickler is a regional network coordinator of rural areas for the Family to Family Network of Virginia at the Center for Family Involvement at the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University. Thank you all very much for being here and for your willingness to share on this topic. For those of you on the webinar or actually with us on Facebook Live, please let us know where you're coming from in the chat box or comments.
Lots of interesting people in our audience. Elizabeth is with us. People have mistaken her for Indigenous Mohawk Hispanic, but she's German, Irish, Scottish, British, French, and French Canadian. And Violetta is a pediatrician in Washington, the state of Washington, and she's from the Dominican Republic. So thank you for using the Q&A until we figure out the chat box.
Okay, so is the chat box working now, you guys? I think I've clicked it properly.
Okay, yes, we have someone who's Italian.
Ooh.
And the chat was working. Great.
Okay, yay. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Zipporah now, who's going to take it from here and start our conversation.
All right, well, to follow up with Shantae, thank you everyone for joining us tonight for this really important conversation. I was really happy when I was asked to be a part of this conversation and to moderate this discussion with such a great, diverse panel that has lots of experience of educating others on how to share their cultural backgrounds, both professionally and personally, as we are all special needs parents on this panel as well. So I think we're going to have a really great discussion. So to start out, we're going to talk about what is cultural diversity. And I know this is a topic that we're hearing a lot more over the past couple of years, but some people still don't understand how deep our cultures are. I think a lot of people still think of culture as maybe where you're from or your race or even your religious background, but it goes much deeper than that. On this slide here, we can see the different dimensions of diversity. We have age and our race, of course, our ethnicity, our heritage, gender, whether or not we have a disability and the type of a disability we have, our sexual orientation, and even different mental abilities and characteristics. Our culture is, again, a lot more than just how we look or what we believe in as far as our morals and our religious beliefs. It also can include our education, the way we communicate, the way we interact with others. So, you know, this is not stuff that you can just understand from a person when you just see them. So it's really important to figure out ways to ask if you are a professional, a way to ask the family what is important to them and what things that you should consider when interacting with them and developing plans of care. As a parent, it's really important for us to make sure that we advocate for our loved ones and ourselves, to make sure that these important pieces are included in that plan, because if it's not included, it's really not a person-centered plan. And we definitely want to make sure that all of our plans of care are person-centered to ensure the success. And it's really easy to kind of, when you're providing care for someone, to kind of generalize things and just, assume and just think about creating plans and creating routines and systems based on what the majority of society does. And when we do that, it puts us at risk of becoming offensive, or again, creating a plan that's not appropriate for the person. And when we were having this conversation, Claudia, you shared a really good example of why it's important for us to take into consideration a person's culture. Can you share that story with the group tonight about the young man that you were helping?
Yes, I'll be glad to. Like Sephora said, the value of really understanding the culture will make a difference whether or not, what you as a professional, right? If you're a professional, are teaching is going to not just generalize, but maintain when you're gone, right? Like when you teach it, you want it to be maintained. You want that skill to be useful for that family. So, we normally, and not everything's cookie cutter, but, as a professional, sometimes you see lacks of skills and that you think are appropriate, and you try to target them. So in this occasion, we were targeting washing dishes and putting dishes in the dishwasher as a form of chores, and also to help the family, and to teach a skill, for our client. And the grandmother was kind of like not into it, right? And we see that a lot. Like sometimes the parents may say one thing, or they're a participant, but sometimes it's the grandparent or the aunt or whoever that is really there doing the care, of the client. And we realized very, very quickly that the grandma was not into like helping us with teaching the skill, because in their family, none of the males, were almost kind of like allowed to do any cooking, allowed to do any washing of the dishes.
Right.
So this was a skill that was not relevant for this family and this culture. And we surely said, okay, we're not going to teach that, and we're going to move to something that is more appropriate, because this client will never use that skill. And part of it is also seeing is this individual going to be living at home or eventually moving away and needing the skill eventually. And that's a communication as a professional that we had. And they said, no, it's going to stay with us. So then we said, okay, then we're going to eliminate that target goal, right?
Right. So that again is a really good example, because it's easy for us to kind of think about the natural development of a child into adulthood, and how we really want to help them become independent so they can live independently. So we typically do try to teach these specific skills to them, thinking that we're doing the right thing. But it is very important to think about that cultural piece as well, because otherwise, if you continue with that plan, it wouldn't be beneficial to that young man, because it went against his cultural beliefs, and that could be pretty harmful to him, as well as your relationship with the family. So I'm glad that you did pause and learn more about that. And just hearing that story is something that I will remember, and make sure that I do take more time to learn about those who I work with, and not just assume. Yeah, go ahead.
And I just wanted to say something to the professionals. Be mindful of body, like a movement, a rolling of the eye, a standing back can mean that person is apprehensive to what you're teaching. And
Yeah.
that's your cue as a professional to say, you know, do you want to discuss this? Is this something that is bothering you? Because I'm here to support you in the best way for your family, right? And, you know, not every parent's going to be able to come and be able to be very open about it. So read those cues, those nonverbal cues.
Yeah, and I think that goes really well into what the slide we have up right now about cultural competence. Again, a lot of people assume cultural competence is going to a workshop and, you know, just kind of reading through a list about what each group, the do's and don'ts for each group. But, you know, we are all so unique. And that's not how it's done. So cultural competence is really first understanding what your cultural beliefs are and your morals are, understanding them, but then also understanding and accepting the fact that not everybody is going to agree with that, and the importance of you learning from each person. Again, not just assuming because you worked with one person from a certain demographic that everybody from that demographic is the same. So I am actually going to pause my sharing of my screen now so that we can see all of our panelists. And I know we had our introductions from Shantae a little bit ago, but if we can, for this next question, if you can just briefly share, for the sake of the conversation tonight, what cultural group are you I guess, highlighting for tonight and sharing your stories from. And my first question would be, since Claudia just shared that example, if we can get some other examples of how assumptions affected the quality of care that your family member or even you yourself have experienced. And I'll start with Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca, and I am here today representing the culture of families living in rural areas. So if you're from a rural area where you live, maybe you have a similar story. My second child has cerebral palsy, and when my son was a young teenager, we had to see a specialist that was a 5-hour drive one way from our house. And just it was you know, an assumption made that to us, and I was really taken aback, like, you want me to come back? So we had gone to the appointment, you know, got up at 2 a.m., had to leave the house by 3, get there at about 8 for an appointment, and then they wanted us to come back for a follow-up the following week, and I wasn't prepared for that. I was thinking, okay, we're going to get there and get everything taken care of. But, you know, it was just a challenge because I felt like, you know, we had driven 5 hours and I just thought everything was going to be taken care of. And I had to think of, okay, how am I going to put gas in my car for the follow-up trip? Because, you know, we already had to plan for it. And so sometimes we had to decide what we were going to go without, so that we could put gas in the car for that follow-up appointment. But, you know, 5-hour one way, that's a 10-hour trip. So by the time you get home, you know, you still gotta get dinner on the table. And you know, if families living in rural might understand, you know, how that can really affect you, that some of those barriers that we have, having to drive so far to see a specialist.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, and thank you for sharing that, because I do feel that that thinking about people who don't necessarily live close to the offices is something that's often overlooked. And it's so many, you know, pieces with getting to the appointments, like you mentioned. So I'm glad that you shared that too, to help us all remember, you know, to take that into consideration more. And where you're from doesn't always have to mean, as far as like from another country and stuff. It's even right in your own city, the parts of the town you live in, and how that affects how you get back and forth to your appointments and stuff like that. So thank you for that example. Next, I will pick Hadia. Do you have an example of how an assumption affected the quality of care for your family member or yourself?
You talking to me?
Yes.
I was not sure. Yes. So I can share. So it was my son's nephrologist, who we had to go for my son's nephrologist retired, so we had to go with a new nephrologist. So he was recommended by my son's other nephrologist. So we went for the doctor's appointment. The second he stepped in, he started asking me questions like, are you guys from India? You guys sit on the floor, eat with hands. You guys don't have furniture in the house. You guys live in expensive houses. And just, assuming stuff about me and my son. And then he proceeded to ask about questions that if you are able to, my son was born in the US. I was so baffled because my son was in NICU for such a long time, and then he was part of this hospital ever since he was born. So those were the questions which really baffled me. That showed me he never had the time to look for my son's my chart, his history, and he was just racially profiling us because of our race and color, not trying to get to know who we were, but focusing on our race. So that is the thing which really bothered me.
Yeah, I am sorry to hear that you went through that. And unfortunately, it is something that happens often. Again, when you step into the office as a family or person of color, unfortunately, a lot of assumptions are made. I know for myself as a African American mom, and I have 4 children. And when I go to appointments, I have been asked if all my children have the same father. And, it's a question that offended me, but I thought it was just a standard question until I shared it in a parent support group that I was in. And the other moms looked at me like, are you serious? Like, I've never heard that question before. So it is important to, be mindful of your different biases and stereotypes, and just try to, treat each person as like a fresh slate, because you never know. And the assumptions can be very offensive. Moretta, can you share an example?
Sure. Well, I'm an African American mom. I have 2 adult children. My youngest has a developmental disability, and I remember this was years ago, but we were at an appointment, and I think my daughter was about 2 at the time, and I remember, and this experience has kind of, it stuck with me, but I remember where she went to see a team of specialists. It was like a clinic, they call it cerebral palsy clinic or what have you. And I remember we were having this discussion, we were talking about different things. And then one of the specialists there, I believe her discipline might have been special education. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Mm-hmm. But she was asking me about school and my daughter going to preschool and so forth. At that particular time, I had talked with some other parents, and they had told me like all kinds of like horrible stories about like, like the preschool, the special education programs and so forth. And, that was really concerning. But when the person asked me about that, I said to her, well, it depends. I mean, my daughter may not be going to school, she may not be going. And this lady, oh my gosh, she looked at me as if, I had said like the worst thing in the world. And she said, well, kids do go to school. That's where they go to get educated. Education is, she said something to that effect. And I was just really, really like taken back. And like I said, my daughter was really young at the time. And what I wish she just made an assumption that education, was not important to me. And I wish that she had a follow-up question, with Mrs. Copeland, why is it that you wouldn't send your daughter to school?
Right.
And I could have explained to her the reason, what I had heard, and it would have been really helpful if she had said to me, well, that you can check out the preschool programs, in your area, and see if there's something that might, if it might work for you, for your child or not. I wish that she had done that, because that is what I ended up doing, later on my own. But from that point on, I mean, I remember it was very, very, very uncomfortable. And she just made this assumption that education was not important to me, in which it really was. It's just that I had heard horrible things from other parents and didn't have any experience with like special education services in the
Yeah,
school system.
goodness. Yeah, that's the stereotypes and stuff. It's very harmful, and it's actually distracting, from the care. Just to pause for a minute, Molly and Flip, do we have any stories in the chat?
In our live chat, we have a lot. Violetta said she represents Hispanics.
Mm-hmm.
In developing her clinic and Autism Center for Excellence, she found out that it's assumed that a lot of Hispanics in my area do not speak English, and the care they received is not good quality care. A lot of time developmental questions get brushed off or concerns gets dismissed. And she also said, once I took my daughter to her checkup and the care we got was bad. And she told her that she was a pediatrician, and she asked her if she wanted her to even finish the checkup. Also I want to, Kiki has added that her go-to when she's unsure with a new family is help me understand, or I was just wondering. So that's how she addresses it.
I like that. I like that. And I know we had a couple of examples of how assumptions and stereotypes affects the dynamics between the family and the provider. Claudia, you had another example that was more of being mindful of how you interact. Can you share that story?
Yes. So today, I represent Latina as per my accent, right? But I'm saying that this is my second story that I'm going to talk about my perspective being a behavior analyst. At the end, I'll share something as being as a parent, because I do have my third child has autism.
Mhm.
So, but as Latina, I was under the assumption that I knew all the Latino rules, right? So I just wanted to caution some people that even when it's your own culture, there is like a micro culture within the
Right.
households, right?
Yeah.
So one time, and I was very green, I was like my first client ever, right? Like I come out and and I go out there and I had two clients in the home. I start seeing one, I ask about the other. They said, oh, it's in the backyard playing, and the RBT, or back then I think he was a student analyst in that case.
Mhm.
And so I look at my watch, I'm like, okay, so after 30 minutes, I'm thinking like it's really hot in Florida, right? Like, okay, 30 minutes out, okay. I finished my session with this one child for 1 hour. And then I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna go see what's going on with my other client, because it's like noon, hot, right? So I go out there and I see they're both are like sweating profusely, right? And I look at the student analyst and she's getting beat up. Like, I mean, she's just really like taking it, And I said, what's going on here? And she tells me, I haven't been able to get him inside. So we start going through all the reinforcers that we think we know. And then, all of a sudden he moves and his flip-flop comes out of his foot. All right. And the grass touches. And as a behavior analyst, I'm thinking his reaction of the face, I'm always looking at those nonverbal cues, right? So I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he didn't like the grass. So I grab the flip-flop and I go like this. Like, if this is the flip-flop, I go, do you want it? Let's go inside, because I mean, now they've been like apparently like 2 hours and I mean, they're dehydrating, So I'm like, you want it? Let's go. And Lord and behold, he start walking, So we take him inside, the mom and the grandma are looking at me. We go inside, I give it back, and he's now happy. And then, like now we gave him water and all of that. And so the student analyst tells me, what did you do? And I said, apparently the grass was an aversive and all of that, right? So that's like my one of my first visits with the family. I don't know them that well, later on, I really get to know them a little bit. And then mom says to me, you know, the first time that you came in here, I laughed so hard. And I said, what do you mean you laugh so hard? I laugh so hard about you. You're explaining to a student how, you know, how the aversiveness of the grass, when you're holding a flip-flop, which we call chancleta, right? And you're going, you want it? Meaning like, you want to get hit with it? You know, like, you know, her mom used to say, I'm gonna whack you with this, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, as a Latina, I've heard those stories before, but in my house, we never used it. And I was livid. I was like, oh my God, I just told this kid and he made listen to me because he was threatened by me hitting him with a flip-flop, right? So don't assume, you know, the culture, even when it's your own culture.
Yeah, like you said, they're all different. Yeah.
I never made another assumption like that again, let me tell you.
Yeah. That story, you know, it's a good lesson. It's funny, but then it just reminds you too, you know, again, that we're all different, you know, and not to assume. You know, so now I want to talk about, you know, because you all provided really good examples of how these different assumptions and really like stereotypes, how it affected your dynamic with that professional. I would like to get a little bit more information. How did you handle that situation, right? Because I know I've been in multiple situations, unfortunately, where, you know, the professional makes a comment that's offensive, or you can tell by the body language, or you just notice a different treatment. So what I would like to know is how you handle that situation and suggestions on how to handle that situation. But before I get to the panelists, I see that we have some more comments in the chat, Molly. And if you are sharing, you're on mute.
Sorry, yes, Flip has a lot of good comments from the Facebook Live, and also Elizabeth has said that both she and her son have been publicly called the R word, in spite of all of her educational background and skills and activities. And then Michelle says when her son was in the NICU, she was called too emotional by some of her son's staff, justifying that because she was a Mediterranean culture Italian. And she didn't appreciate it. It sounded pitiful, and they were minimalizing and labeling the deep pain that you're going through. And her child was in the NICU for 18 months.
Oh gosh.
And Flip has also posted from Facebook, I'm a white professional and have primarily worked with culturally and economically diverse families. I treasure and value the relationships I've made and still hear from families 15 to 20 years later. My priority is not knowledge, but the ability to build rapport and develop this trusting relationship. That is my door to be able to problem solve and support. And that's from Kiki McGraw.
That's awesome. That is awesome. You know, it's while I am happy to have this conversation, it's also really upsetting to see, you know, that we are all parents or, you know, family members that are trying our best to get care for our loved ones and to help them have a good quality of life. And while we're trying to figure all of that out and, you know, have all of the emotions and the stress and, you know, everything that goes along with that we're faced with these situations. And if we just look at the panelists and we see how, just looking at us, how we're all different, we're all in different parts of the country, we're you know, different educational backgrounds. Our children may have different diagnoses and stuff, but we all have felt that hurt, you know, from dealing with these assumptions. And it's definitely a conversation that we need to have more of. So going back to what I was saying earlier, what are some, how do you deal with that? How do you deal when you're in the office or in the classroom and, you know, you just experienced the professional who you're going to to get answers treat you in this manner. How do you handle that? I guess I'll start with Moretta this time.
Well, that's a good question. It depends on the person, the provider, or the professional that I'll happen to be working with. It just depends. There are times where, I have pulled that person, directly to the side and, went on ahead and, hey, what you said was incorrect. You made an assumption about me, or you made an assumption about my kid, and blah, blah, and so forth, and go ahead and correct it then. There are other times where I felt like it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't going to be seeing that specialist or that particular person again, and it wasn't
Right.
worth my time to even dignify the comment or assumption that was made. And then, there are times you just have to pick your battles, because it can be exhausting. And so that's typically what I do. But if it is, someone that I respect, and I felt that they just made a mistake, because people can make mistakes because
Right.
they just don't know. Then I'm going to take the time and, find a way, find a time where I can, hey, speak with them and say, hey, you said this, but that was incorrect, and blah, blah, and so forth. So it just depends on the situation and whether or not, it's a safe place and you feel comfortable or not. I remember one time with my daughter's pediatric dentist at the time, I remember correcting her about something, and you have to be, careful, because I was correcting her about something, and she got really, really, really offended. And, she got really offended. And, yeah, so, so there is that power dynamic, you know what I mean? And so, you have to, you kind of have to, fill out the person and know, it just depends. It varies, as far as my experience is concerned.
Yeah, I do hear that, and I definitely agree. And sometimes it may be a situation where you immediately, say something, and other times maybe, towards the end of the appointment, or sending an email later on. Rebecca, what suggestion do you have, with dealing with these situations? What would you say is important for the families and the professionals to try to do?
Right. So being a family member and a professional, I wish that I knew better back then. I tended to, get offended, and but I think it's really important that as family, as the parent of a child with a disability, when we're at the doctor's office, there are things that we can do as well as the professionals. But just to get to know if there's, time to build that relationship with the provider, the professional, whether you're seeing a doctor, or it's your child's teacher, or, the principal at the school, or, any professional that is dealing with your child, that we build that relationship with them. I think that I would have, handled that situation much better if I knew ahead of time what to expect. And so a lot of times I will try to get that from the professional, from the doctor, and just say, just to ask questions, what can I expect? How long do you think his appointment will be?
That's a
And
good
so
idea.
just, asking questions. I really liked what somebody had said in the chat about asking, help me understand. And I think that's a good way for professionals to talk with their patients, help me understand your culture better. What can we do to help you feel more comfortable in our office? Or, so
Yeah.
it's important to continue that two-way communication as well.
Yeah, I think that is a very good tip. And remembering that while it's important for the professionals to ask these questions, we also need to ask certain questions too, and then that will help us identify maybe some barriers that we can address before the situation comes. So thank you for that suggestion. Hadia, you shared a something that you do as a way to educate others. Can you share that with the group?
Sure. So what I do is I am part of my local Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and I am part of their board where we try to educate the residents to give them the bedside manners of how to deal with the patient, how to meet where they are in the process. And I can tell you, at times, even if you are sharing what you feel about your culture is offensive, they might not take it. They might be just saying that because when I shared my story and they were like, oh, they were just being polite, they were just, they were just talking about your culture. But my biggest thing was just because it comes to your mind does not mean that's an appropriate thing to ask about anybody's culture. You need to develop a bond, as most of the professionals over here said. Develop a bond. And after that, if you're able to ask those questions, that's a different story. But have that bond first for you to ask those questions. Try to meet families where they're in the process. If it's the first appointment, don't come up with your cultural biases for that person and asking all these questions. Make sure you get to know the family first before you go ahead and ask all those questions. And we are, as a person of color, I'm willing to share everything you want to ask about my culture, but first develop that bond with us first.
Right. Yeah, that's a great suggestion as well. Molly, we have some comments in the chat. And also, before we get to those, I do want to let you guys know that towards the end of this presentation, we do have a little cheat sheet for families as well as professionals for some different do's on how to start these conversations. But please, use this time to add some of your ideas to the chat. And let's see if there's some more out there that we may have missed. And Molly, what are you seeing in the chat right now?
Well, we heard from Sherry, who has adopted 3 boys that are not all the same race that she is. And so people make a lot of assumptions about who's adopted and what kids are hers. And she makes a really good point. And she says, I think it's about educating people rather than criticizing them. And then if the issues continue, it's a problem. We also hear from Casey, who says, people assume that my son is not intelligent because he stims and makes unique facial expressions with his autism. And I use that as a chance to educate them about how my son's autism actually gives him some amazing superpowers, and help them see that if he focuses on his preferred tasks, his different ways of looking at a problem, his unique perspective on the world. And so that is a big assumption that people make about people who exhibit a lot of self-stim behaviors is that they're not paying attention or they don't hear what you're saying, and talk about people in front of them as if they aren't there.
Yeah.
Kiko also adds that as a professional, the more we can frame things up front with family regarding meetings or appointments, the better chance that they are going to feel that we're supported.
Great. Thank you all for adding that into the chat. Claudia, you again have another great story as an example of, having that conversation and sharing with the professional team your cultural and religious beliefs. Can you share that story with the group?
Yes, I'm going to switch a little bit now. Instead of being the analyst, I'm going to go down to when I have had my conversations as a parent. And Casey, I wanted to say my older daughter, would agree with you now, but when she was younger and somebody would say, what's wrong with your brother? He can't stop talking, or like, why is he flipping his hands? Is he dumb or something? My daughter would have always said, you can never judge a book by its cover, right? But I mean, that was her quick response when she was young, and now she has chosen to do what you do. She says, he's very brilliant in so many ways, that I wanted to say, I hear you. And so my last story that I will share with you guys about, my family is that, as you heard before, I am an analyst, and I've learned to now do what one of the person put in there. I think it was Kiki earlier, that said, you know, like I really do first and foremost, you know, I like to get to know you, but also know that if I say something that might offend you or that doesn't go with your beliefs, please stop me and educate me, right? I am here to serve you and to really become part of your team and support. And if you please have that open communication with me, right, as your professional. But I am now going to go and tell you that as a parent, we need to be able to vocalize that with the person that is going to work with our child, right? And we talked about like dentists, pediatricians, you know, behavior analysts, whomever that be.
Mhm.
And you know, I am Latina. I'm Catholic, married to a Jewish man. And we don't always agree with some of the things that we as a culture or religion should do or teach our son.
Right.
And you know, he's now 19, and we're having to talk about like even sexuality and how do we teach that, and how do we teach masturbation, do we teach where to do it appropriately, or do we deny, like, you know, like as a Catholic, you're not supposed to even think about that, right? So I lost that battle, right? You know, but you know, like there's other battles that, like, for example, teaching what is you know, pornography, that's one that I won't vouch. And but that's just my me, right? My husband would say no. I mean, that's normal and age appropriate. So I mean, I just have to tell you that as a parent, you have to be confident to be able to talk to your team, your professional, and say, you know, that part I am not comfortable with. You know, and even for me as a parent, that I'm a behavior analyst, it was very uncomfortable to say, and I had to say, hey, I need a team meeting. I want everybody here, my husband, let's come with a solution, because maybe it's me and my own biases for my cultural being, but also some of the stuff that I do want to be respected still. So, and like I said, it's not always an easy, and sometimes I you know, you will not always get, Miranda, you said the professional may get offended or whatever, but it is your right as a parent. And if you don't do it, then some of the things that you want to be taught or not taught will happen, you know. So give yourself, and it's hard, all of this communication, you know, as a parent, it's hard. And I have all these supposed bags of tools from being an analyst, right? So if I'm telling you that it was even hard for me, I had to say to my husband, I don't agree with that. Like I really needed the whole team to sit down and say, hey, time out, right? Like, you know, I want to really, I understand that some things may be, you know, physiological, some things may be, you know, like, and like I said, I mean, some of the things the professional had to guide me and say, hey, this is going to happen. We just, regardless whether you like it or not, we can help you teach appropriateness and timely and where, and, you know, safe space. And other things where I was like, okay, I don't know, like this is a little too much, or maybe at this moment, let's compartmentalize. And so, but do have those important conversations with your team and tell them what you're comfortable with, but be realistic, and also listen to your team, because some things are going to happen, and you might as well have the support and be able to teach your child or your loved one how to do it in an appropriate way. But like I said, you are still have your right to be able to say, I'm comfortable with this, or,
Right.
you know.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Again, you know, thank you all. As we head into the summary of this webinar, I really appreciate and am very honored to share the webinar stage with you ladies tonight. And I appreciate all of you sharing such personal stories with the group, and just really you know, feel happy that by you guys all sharing your stories and serving as good examples to professionals and to parents on how to have these conversations and the importance of these conversations. So again, thank you all for your time and valuable information. And now I will go ahead and turn it back over to Shantae.
Shantae has to unmute. Sorry, everybody. Yes, I have to say thank you, everybody, too. I think this is, I really appreciate everybody sharing their personal stories. And I think that this is great. I'm glad that we're able to start the conversations, because I think it is so important, especially with what everyone has said. So we have some do's for families and some do's for professionals. So I'll just run through them. For families, do seek understanding from others when assumptions are present. Do offer information about your culture if it's not mentioned by the professional. Do have patience. Professionals are trying to do what's right. I think Kiki mentioned in the thing, go with everyone's trying to best intentions. Do encourage the use of resources that reflect your own culture, beliefs, and norms, such as books, stories, or brochures. And do respect everyone's culture, even if it's different from your own. Ask questions about the cultures and beliefs so that we can all become more aware. And for professionals, do respect that and recognize concepts such as family, gender, roles, spirituality, emotional well-being, very significant and influence behavior. And do recognize your own bias. Be open, ask for feedback if you do something that's culturally offensive. Accept feedback with grace. Do seek to understand and validate the family's concerns without minimizing or maximizing them. And do remember, whatever you decide for your child is not necessarily right for the family. They know their loved one best. So I think that's very important as well. In closing, if you have any comments or questions that you guys would like to ask, I think this was a very important topic. I'm thrilled that we were able to put it together, and we could not have done it without the organizations that you see on the screen that helped us bring this together, as well as some of the people that are not here, such as Tara Cessna and Marsha Quinn. She is here, but she's behind the screen. Molly Dellinger-Ray, who's also working in the chat, and Flip Gray, who's working for Parenting Special Needs, working in the chat room, and Laura Kern, who keeps us all organized, because this is a lot of people to organize when we're all busy, and we couldn't do it. We couldn't bring this to you without the help of everybody. So we thank you so much, and the panelists. And Zipporah, thank you very much for being the moderator tonight. You did an excellent job, and I greatly appreciate it. And all of the panelists who shared their personal stories, thank you so much. And we want to, I don't know if there's any questions anybody has. We can, I think this is a very important topic, and I thank you all for allowing us to bring it and opening the conversation.
We have lots of appreciation in the chat of people saying it was helpful. It will help them in their practice. It will help them be brave. Claudia, especially you're sharing very personal stories about how you were able to share your personal background and just not get behind some of the things that were promoted for you. So people just enjoyed it. Flip, I don't know if you're getting.
No, it's pretty silent over here.
Okay, thank you everyone for being with us.
So yeah, so I guess we'll wrap it up a little bit early, but thank you all very much. Anything else anybody else wanted to say before we sign off?
All right. Thank everybody for coming and joining us, and we appreciate your comments and that active participation. And we always love to hear what topics you guys like in the future. So before you go, if you want to type that, we'll do our best to try to accommodate.
That is a great idea, Shantae. We should share information about our next family chat. I'm not sure of what the date is, but it's on a really important topic, and that is the battle over food.
Oh yes, that is. I forgot. And yes, and person-centered planning is the next one. So yes, if you guys have any stories for that, or if you'd like to participate or want to send us questions, we would greatly appreciate that. Again, I can't thank the panelists enough for giving us their time and their expertise and sharing their personal stories. Thank you so much. And thank you all for attending.
I think the chat has ended. Thank you, everyone. This was amazing.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone have a
Thank you.
good night and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. Next week.
Thank you. Same to you guys.
All right, take care. Bye.